Well, I thought it was a sad story until I joined Health Watch and ProPublica, and I went to DC to a national march and started meeting people in my state. And now I feel like a pretty lucky parent because I've got a kid that has a lot of friends and he's happy and we love him. But we had a tough time, and I want to let you know how that went. And I do want to try to help other people avoid things like this. Gilda Radner said, "Some stories don't have a clear beginning, middle, and end. Life is about not knowing, having to change, taking the moment, and making the best of it." And this quote represents my adventure with my son, Peter, and our family. So there are four in my family. It's Dave, my husband, Miles, who's now 16, Peter's 13, and me. And we're an athletic and healthy family. And in fact, my only experience with a big medical center outside of pregnancy was when my husband was once hospitalized for a few days when we lived in Switzerland during a foreign job assignment. So we had so little experience with medical centers up until about 2.5 years ago that I didn't even know what PA stood for. I actually thought a PA was a doctor. And I've learned so much and now want to help others with both my son and their situations. So this year, I wrote out the story, and here are the basics. It was a Sunday morning on Memorial Day weekend in 2014. Peter fell hard on an outstretched right arm on cement. And despite immediate medical care, which extended for months, Peter was never able to put his palm down flat again. His elbow just doesn't turn right. So he looks normal, but his range of motion in his elbow, it's not functional. And so he can raise and he can lower his arm. And this means, though, because he can't move his elbow over, when he's typing, he types with his pinky on his right hand. So if you're looking at your own keyboard, you can even try that. And you think about typing, but you're typing primarily with just your pinky on your right hand. And that's because if that elbow is in the handshake-like position, you can't turn it over. That's called pronation. It makes things tough. Also, if you want to see what this is like, you could itch your head right now with your right hand. And in the handshake-like position, you just pull it up, and you're going to use that pinky again. You're not going to be able to turn like this. So if you're Peter and you're doing chores like scrubbing a pot, washing a car, using a key, text messaging, or you want to try to play basketball, these are the type of things which require compensation with your shoulder and your wrist. And this will make up for the elbow problem a good bit. The problem is that down the line, people have problems who use this type of compensation. And you can't completely compensate for this sort of rigid position in the elbow. Well, naturally, as a mother, I was so worried about what happened to Peter. My husband's incredibly supportive, but works both internationally and nationally. So this story is going to be about Peter and me learning about his radio ulnar synostosis, and it's a rare bone growth where the bone fuses the forearms. Now, it can be both congenital or it can occur after surgery. I've divided the talk into 3 parts. Part 1 is day of injury through surgery. Part 2 is surgery and physical therapy visits. And Part 3 is consultation visits. Part 1. Sunday, May 25th, 2014, my husband and I take Peter to an urgent care facility because he's fallen hard off a skateboard and onto the garage cement floor on an outstretched arm. He hit his elbow too, and he screams that he's broken his arm. Peter gets 2 elbow view x-rays and 3 wrist view x-rays at the urgent care center. The provider looks alarmed and says, "We think we might need surgery today. We'll be back." And about 20 minutes later, we're told that Peter needs to be taken to a surgical center up the street and they'll splint him. But the injury can be handled more next week after the 3-day Memorial Day weekend. So we go up the street and the PA at the surgical center doesn't seem pleased to see us at all. And he explains to us and writes in the medical record, "I actually spoke with the PA and doctor," and that's at the urgent care, "on the phone regarding the patient after looking at the x-rays. He had a radial neck fracture, and we told them to just put him in a long arm posterior splint, and he can follow up next week. I did tell the family there is a chance surgical intervention may be needed, but it's not emergent, and we will have him follow up with repeat x-rays and recommendations." So Peter is then splinted by a friendly woman, and we leave. Now, it won't be until 2015 that I laboriously get what I believe are all the medical records. And I learned that when we switch Peter from the urgent care to the surgical center owned by a different healthcare group, there seemed to be two concerning medical record discrepancies. Number one, at the first urgent care, Peter's history of illness is recorded as patient landed on right arm. But at the second surgical center, it shows Peter landed directly on his right elbow. The arm involvement never seems to get completely corrected in the following 5 months of care. And while Peter will have lots and lots of arm problems during this time, and even lots of references to his arm in the medical records and pain, there will be 5 more sets of elbow x-ray views, but he will never get a single arm x-ray view, even though there are also 2 surveys in the medical records where Peter is asked, "What was the cause of your pain and symptoms?" And Peter responds, "Broken arm." And the second thing that seems concerning here is that there were 2 different radiology reports. The first radiology report lists what seems like 3 problems. It has number 1, chipped fracture proximal ulnar, 2, fracture distal humerus, and 3, dislocated fractured radial head. But the second radiology report lists a fracture dislocation of only a proximal right radius. And it also states that the comparison is none. But it seems to me that there would be a comparison, and it would be with the first radiology report. At any rate, Peter spends 5 months getting care for just the fractured radial head. Peter has a medical appointment 2 days after the injury, and it's a busy post-holiday Tuesday morning. It's humming. And this appointment is done primarily by a PA who explains that Peter will get a closed surgery with percutaneous pins on the following Monday. I ask 2 questions. Number 1, do we need more x-rays? And number 2, is it okay to wait 8 days for surgery? The PA has a little board on the wall, and he pops the x-rays onto the wall. He seems a little irritated with me, and he says, "Look, I can see what happened." He shows me the damage. We don't need more x-rays, and it's fine to wait. And then the surgeon comes in, and he agrees with the PA. The surgeon leaves. The PA splints Peter, and we head home. Unfortunately, Peter has bad arm pain following the splinting, and it even increases the next day. And I call about this, and I'm told that Peter can add ibuprofen to the Tylenol with codeine that he's taking. And I try this, and I try raising his arm, and I'm trying icing it. But in the afternoon, he starts slamming his feet on the floor and crying out in pain. And thankfully, it is just at this time that I'm getting a phone call from a receptionist to schedule Peter's surgery room. And this receptionist is calling for insurance information, but I tell her about Peter's arm problems, and she says, "I will get someone to help you." And she does. And I get a quick return call from a very friendly person. I go back to the first center where Peter was splinted. They waive the copay. They take him directly in. They take off that splint. And this is the photo. They're surprised at how much his arm is swollen. And I say, "Well, if it's swollen this much, does he need surgery now?" And the woman said, no, we can't do surgery now because it's too swollen. I'll resplint him. He can have surgery on Monday. Well, I've brought a little cooler bag with ice and a washcloth and water in it. And I say, she just is ready to resplint. I said, "Could you leave us maybe 20 or 25 minutes and just let me cool his arm with the ice and the washcloth and get his fingers moving again?" I was worried he didn't seem to have very good circulation. And she said, "Oh yeah," she was happy to do that. And she left me. And so I worked on Peter myself, and he calmed down. And after that, this is after about 20 minutes, I took this picture of Peter because my husband was traveling out of town and I wanted him to see what was happening. So she comes back in, she's ready to resplint. And I have this pile of splinting material to the side. And I said, "Well, can we reuse some of that splinting material?" And actually, I think that's what you can see to his side on the table. And she says, "No." And I said, "Well, why can't we reuse some of it?" And she says, "This splint was at the wrong angle and the wrong length." So she resplints Peter. His pain decreases significantly, though it's not gone. Now, much later, I will realize several things. First, Peter didn't see a PA at this visit. He didn't see a doctor at this visit, and he didn't get any x-rays. And the visit never even went in the medical records. This picture, which is dated and timed on my iPhone, is the only proof I have of this visit, though I did email my aunt about it. And I called the medical facility the next day and filed an anonymous complaint against the PA because I didn't want him fired. That's why I did it anonymously. But I did call the surgeon's office, tell the receptionist what had happened, and I said, I want you to talk to the surgeon and see, is that PA going to be in surgery, because I won't let him have surgery with this PA. And I'd also like to know, how many of these surgeries does this surgeon do a year? And so she called me back. She talked to the surgeon, and she said he does 5 to 7 of them a year. And don't worry, the PA won't be in the surgery. So we went ahead and had surgery, closed arm surgery, and that's on June 2nd, 2014, 8 days from injury. There were no x-rays on surgery day, but we did get fluoroscopy photos of pin placement. And the medical record from the surgery states, of note, with full supination, there was some anterior translation of the radial head on the capitellum. And I now wonder, were those bones ever really lined up right? And there is also an additional note that says, possible need to remove pins at the first follow-up appointment if there is anterior translation of the radial head. But at Peter's first follow-up after surgery, Peter had 2 elbow x-ray views, and this is on 6/10/2014, and we're told that everything looks fine, and we will see him in 2 weeks for a repeat exam. And so we return, and he's happy to get his cast off, and it's 6/26/2014. So he's getting that splint off after 24 days, and he's a happy camper. And I remember the doctor seemed surprised, though, when he turned his arm. It was stiff. It sort of stopped a bit. And I remember the doctor's eyes. I thought they looked a little surprised, and he made a mention that Peter would need a good physical therapist. And the medical records note abundant healing callus, slight anteriorization of radial head. But the doctor was reassuring, and he told us that children have a way of healing and being resilient, and it sounded good, and that's what you want to hear. So in July, August, and October, additional surgeon visits and elbow x-ray views don't seem to explain Peter's growing arm problems, though. And in the August visit, the surgeon writes into the medical record that Peter should hold off on splinting because his arm is mainly a bony issue. He tries to reassure me, telling me that he has congenital deformity patients set like Peter, and they could live this way. But I'm concerned as Peter is becoming increasingly unhappy, and he periodically refers to his arm as stupid, and he smashes it on things sometimes, and he isn't himself. And Peter also has 8 physical therapy visits from July through October. I press hard for sharing of information and with other providers who might understand this. And the PT, the physical therapist, once mentions that there's a spot of HO, heterotopic calcification or ossification, something like that, in a wrong spot. And I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I know this isn't good. And the physical therapist supervisor once takes a turn with Peter's arm, and as she turns it, he yelps like a little cry. And the physical therapist looked worried and seemed concerned about a blockage. I learned that the physical therapist consulted with another doctor and that Peter's surgeon definitely is getting these physical therapy reports and knows about this. At our final appointment with Peter's surgeon, which is on October 7th, 2014, and remember, he got injured in May, so we've been working on this for a while. We let him know that we have a consultation for Peter's arm planned to see if we can figure things out at another medical facility the following week. And we have been told by that facility to let Peter's surgeon know that we're coming and to tell the surgeon to write into the medical record what he wants them to know. And I tell them exactly what I've been told to do. And Peter's surgeon writes, suggest proximal radial osteotomy to improve position of radial head. I would like to have them follow up with Dr. X for a second opinion, as I would expect that I would proceed with Dr. X in any future intervention. Now, when we leave this appointment, I'm asked to schedule the appointment with Dr. X, and I go ahead and make that appointment. The other thing I noticed is that somewhere in this final medical record, there is a note of continued subluxation, which I believe means these bones aren't quite joined together right. But that's the first notice of, that's the first time in the medical records I see the word subluxation. And if it's continued, you would think you would see that word when it started. The third consultation, let's see, okay, part 3 is consultation. So that finished our last surgeon visit. So clearly we need some consultations. So the first consultation is 10/16 while Peter is still under the surgeon care with the original surgeon. We carry his medical records to this appointment as suggested. And the doctor and the fellow spend about 45 minutes with medical records. And the surgeon tells me that there are some things missing in his medical records. And he also asked why there weren't more x-rays, but I don't know. And the surgery is suggested in 3 months. I ask if there will be an osteotomy. But the doctor states that he doesn't know which surgery he will do, how many surgeries he'll do, or what the follow-up will be. And I ask if we can do something non-surgically. He says that without surgery, the shoulder, the arm, the elbow, they're all going to be destroyed. I let out a quick, short cry, and I tell Peter that we have to have surgery. I ask the name of the problem, explaining that I want to do research, and I want to find the surgeon that has done the most of these in the country. But he tells me that the condition either doesn't or shouldn't happen, and I'm not going to find articles on it, and that no surgeon is an expert on this, is going to have a lot of experience on it. So Peter and I leave the appointment with the scheduling phone number, and we both cry on the way home. Peter is crying because he does not want surgery, and I am crying because I don't know what's happening. So I order a copy of this appointment's medical record, hoping to learn more. At first, I'm told there is not a medical record for this visit, but I explain that I actually have a copay receipt. So I am able to get a medical record, but the medical record states no external records provided, and plan of care recommends osteotomy. So clearly I'm confused. And I talked to my general practitioner who says, this is disappointing. I can't recommend surgery based on this. This brings me to consultation number 2. Consultation number 2 is with a specialist surgeon that Peter's surgeon recommended at the same medical facility. And this consultation occurs on 10/28/14. Peter's original surgeon even calls me at home prior to this appointment to remind me to go and asking me if I'm going to go, will I take Peter? Now, I've heard that more consultations are good. So I say, yes, I'm taking Peter. And the specialist takes 2 more views, 2 more x-ray views of this elbow again. And he writes in the medical record, I do not see any true evidence of stenostosis. It's a tricky problem to treat, but I ultimately think he is best served with a radial neck osteotomy and reduction. The medical record also suggests a CT of elbow beforehand might be helpful to rule out any heterotopic bone. I asked this specialist doctor how many of these surgeries he does yearly and what's the success rate. And he says it's hard to say, maybe 3 to 5, and he says it has approximately 85% success. I also tell the doctor that we have another consultation the next day at a different study, and I tell him about the first surgeon consultation. And he knows these surgeons, talks about them by first name, shares opinions, and gives me additional names of surgeons and scheduling phone number for them. The next consultation, the very following day, is absolutely shocking. Even today, I'm shocked by this one. We walk in, the doctor comes into the room. We're in this little examining room. He asks just a few questions, and he comes over to Peter, takes his arm, and turns it. And it turns just the way it has been for weeks. It just turns and it sort of clumps to a stop in about the handshake position. And he quickly says, synostosis. He asked to bring others in the exam room, and before I know it, the small exam room is now brimming with surgeons and students and fellows, and they take turns. They turn Peter's arm gently, and they all watch it clunk to the stop in about the handshake position. There is 100% agreement in this room that Peter has synostosis based on physical exam alone. They never even look at one x-ray. And he gets a new, longer problem list, which includes acquired deformity of forearm synostosis, subluxation of radial head, contracture of forearm, and radial head fracture. It's now clear to me that Peter's situation is unusual, and I try hard to follow their conversations. It seems that they might not have done a closed surgery at this facility. They might have picked an open one, and they would have run pins differently, and they mentioned something about 8-day wait, and I'm just a little confused. I'm trying to take it all in. And the room clears, and two surgeons are talking outside of the exam door. Alarmed, I follow them, and I ask if something can be done today for Peter. The doctors decide X-rays and MRI can wait 4 months until February 2015. And I am warned that there should be no consideration of surgery for Peter until the full extent of synostosis is determined. And then, since we have seen so many surgeons at this facility, we don't need more consultations. The head surgeon also mentions that he will be at Peter's original medical facility and plans to ask something about the X-rays. I figure that this surgeon works at several medical facilities. The surgeon also says that I can call him at home, but I don't do this. I do write him a letter in November because I'm worried about other children getting hurt at Peter's medical facility. So we returned to the same consultation medical facility on February 20th, 2015 for a final follow-up with MRIs and X-rays. And I've contacted the nurse in advance because during this time I had been able to get the missing medical records. And I asked if I can bring them, and she said yes. I messaged with her, and then should I bring the consultation? She says yes. So I'm disappointed in the beginning of the appointment because I had worked so hard to get these medical records. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And thinking that having these medical records, they could somehow find out the cause of the harm, and then maybe this would help fix him. I was like, I'd worked so hard on this. But the nurse takes the organized stack of medical records, and she quickly returns the records back to me, explaining that the doctor would only let her take Peter's consultations from the other facilities, not his original medical records from the treatment, even though I've explained, like, I found things. So Peter gets tough results from this MRI and his first arm X-ray. Again, this is his first arm X-ray ever. They both show almost 100% bony fusion of the proximal radius and ulna. And it's like so amazing because on that X-ray we can see exactly why this arm hasn't been working now for the longest time. The surgeon's medical report from this visit mentions many things, including mild to moderate deformity, radioulnar synostosis, 40% subluxation of radial head, and activity for Peter is recommended as tolerated. The medical record also states this probably represents a Montegio variant fracture, that's of the arm, and the ulna is too straight, and synostosis secondary to initial injury. The likelihood that this is iatrogenic is low, and the standard of care was not violated. To reduce radial head would require osteotomy, ulna, and resection of synostosis. Now, in the conversation with us, the surgeon explains that even if Peter was to have multiple risky surgeries, and even if the multiple risky surgeries were successful, his range of motion would still not be in the functional range. And he thinks these surgeries would be very risky due to growth plate positioning, and elbows are tough surgeries. So he is clear that we shouldn't even consider surgery until after Peter is older. So in conclusion, I'm not sure what will happen with Peter's arm in the future, but I've continued to collect consultations, talk to a doctor out of the country, and become a friend with a mother whose teen son had the same condition. And that child had a frustrating and unsuccessful corrective surgery and has had more problems than we have. In my own town, I now know of many people with worse surgical experiences than Peter's experience. And I've come to accept that if I can't get Peter fixed, I will share his experience and try to help others. Thank you so much for the opportunity tonight. It means so much to my family and so many others. But I want to leave you with a really happy image of him. Peter, so he loved so many different sports, and we played a lot of tennis together. He was on basketball teams. He was a soccer goalie. So that was a tough time when you lose a lot of those things. But he started being a runner, and he just placed fourth in his first cross country event. So he he knows what happened. We've told him everything. He doesn't like to go to doctors now or dentist, but he's a happy kid. He's enjoying new sports. He has a new batch of friends. My oldest son found a stray kitten, and they've named it Chewbacca, and they're having a lovely time with him. He got great new teachers. School's just started here. Um, he's making his family proud, and you know, for us, I thought this was such a terrible thing, but when I'm on ProPublica and Health Watch and I go to these national marches, honestly, I feel like I was the lucky parent. Thank you.